Good morning, everyone, and it's indeed a pleasure to be back in Stormont again. Before you start tweeting, I have the same problem as William Crawley. But also when the guy came into the green room, why do they call it a green room in a place like this? Yeah, we should have an orange room as well. But anyway. The guy came to put the mic on me in the green room, and he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Jeffrey." He said, "Oh, mistaken identity." He said, "I was getting you ready for your concert." So I am not the one from Donegal either before you start. This morning I want to talk about, as William has said, something that is for me a passion, and that is peace building. And when you look around at the world today, the need for peace builders is just huge. We live in a frightening world, and social media and 24-hour satellite television brings into our homes the reality of the terror that is associated with conflict. Nelson Mandela once said, "You do not make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies." And in essence, that is true. But this morning I want to suggest to you that the art of peace building also requires that you make peace with your friends as well as with your enemies. And I say that from experience in Northern Ireland, but also having observed conflicts around the world and met many people, especially political leaders, who are involved in peacemaking. And as you sit down and in those quiet moments with those political leaders, time and time again, they have said to me, the greatest challenge that we face is bringing our own people with us, making peace with your friends. And I can think of a few examples. The Middle East has been in the headlines in recent weeks. Will the Middle East finally be solved? Will that conflict be brought to an end when the Palestinians reach an agreement with the Israelis? Yes, that may be the case, but actually, before we get to that point, the Israelis need to make peace with themselves, and the Palestinians need to make peace with themselves. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, needs to make peace with the Israeli right wing, and Fatah need to make peace with Hamas on the Palestinian side. And actually, if you study the Middle East peace process, one of the major impediments to a peaceful outcome has been the divisions within the two camps. So making peace is not just about making peace with your enemies. Last weekend, I had the privilege of being in Poland, in the city of Gdansk, with my good friend Eva Grossman, who is very much involved with TEDx. And we attended the opening of a new centre, the European Solidarity Centre, which is on the site of the shipyard in Gdansk. And if you cast your mind back to the days of Lech Walesa, the Solidarity Trade Union, the move against communism, and the creation of a democratic state in Poland. And Lech Walesa was there for the opening of this Solidarity Centre. And he stood on the trailer on this little truck at the gates of the shipyard, just as he had done all those years ago when he led the strike against the communist rulers in Poland. And he spoke passionately about the journey that he had been on. The following day, there was a little ceremony inside the grounds of the shipyard where Lech Walesa and the president of Poland planted a tree, and they called it the Tree of Freedom. And as Lech Walesa was putting his mound of soil onto the base of that tree, there were some protesters there. They were shipyard workers, or rather redundant shipyard workers, because of course the shipyard in Gdansk no longer builds the ships that it used to build. And as Lech Walesa was planting the tree, they were shouting, "What kind of freedom is this?" And by that they meant, we haven't got a shipyard anymore. So for them, the journey had been a negative experience. And yet these were people who belonged to the Solidarity trade union, who stood shoulder to shoulder with Lech Walesa during that strike. And there we were all those years later, and they were denouncing him. But I put it to you that Poland would not be where it is today if it had not been for the leadership and the courage and the risks taken by Lech Walesa. It would not be the burgeoning democracy that it is. It would not be one of the most successful economies in the European Union today had it not been for the risks taken by Lech Walesa. And yet, in the taking of those risks, he lost friends, people who were part of his movement. And so, right at the heart of our very being, and John Alderdice spoke about this earlier, at the heart of our genetic makeup is a sense of belonging, a need to belong. Our identity is critical. Look at the number of conflicts across the world today that have at their heart the issue of identity. And here in Northern Ireland, identity was at the heart of our conflict. The sense of belonging, the question, to which nation do you belong? And so we have a great want within us to have this sense of identity. And when it comes to peace building, sometimes leaders have to push the boundaries that create difficulties, personal difficulties for them in terms of their identity, their sense of belonging to their tribe, their clan, their political party, their community, their family. I remember during the negotiations that led to the what we call the Good Friday Agreement, and then subsequently to the St. Andrews Agreement, many conversations that I had within my family circle about the peace process. Like many families in Northern Ireland, mine is a family that has been touched by the Troubles. And so the peace process was important in some senses, in different ways, to different members of my family circle. But I would be bound to say that as a politician, I was greatly influenced by those discussions that took place within my family, because that was my sense of belonging. I'd come through the Troubles as part of that family circle. I'd seen the hurt and the pain that had been inflicted upon that family circle. I'd seen it in my community. I'd seen it amongst the people that I had the privilege to represent. And in 1997, I was elected to Parliament and straight into the negotiations. One of the first decisions I had to take as a member of Parliament was whether to stay in the talks when Sinn Féin entered the negotiations in the summer of 1997. And I remember having a conversation with my father about this. And this was a man who'd served for 25 years in the Ulster Defence Regiment and latterly the Royal Irish Regiment. He'd seen a number of his comrades killed. And he said to me, you know, we have to move on. There has to be something better than this. And I would say that that was a significant influence for me in the decision to support my party staying in the talks and having Sinn Féin at the negotiating table. And I remember in advance of St. Andrews attending a meeting in Londonderry. Stephen spoke passionately about his time in that city and explaining what we were trying to achieve through the negotiations at St. Andrews. And there were lots of difficult questions. There were a lot of people in that room who really struggled with the idea of my party going into government with Sinn Féin. And at the end of the meeting, there was an elderly lady came up to me. This elderly lady had lost her husband, who was an RUC officer. But not only had she lost her husband, her daughter had also been killed, an RUC officer, in that city of Londonderry. I can't begin to contemplate her sense of loss, her pain. And yet she said to me, Jeffrey, we have got to do this. We must move forward. So, making peace with your friends, I believe, is about two things. First of all, it is about leadership, and it is about taking risks, but it's also about communication. As I have studied peace processes across the world, the ones that I find that succeed are the ones where the leaders are effective communicators. They are able to explain to their own people what it is they are doing and why they're doing it, and to explain it in terms that people can relate to illustrate it to them in human terms, to make that human connection. And when I look at peace processes that have failed, I see leaders who really struggle to communicate, who are, in a sense, prisoners to the loudest voices within their own community. And often the loudest voices are the people in opposition. So making peace with your friends is difficult and it's challenging, but you cannot make peace with your enemies without making peace with your friends. A leader who is going to make a deal with his political opponent is only as good as his ability to bring his own people with him. And that's important. I need to know, as a negotiator, that the people sitting opposite me have the capacity to bring their people with them. Because the compromises that are at the heart of peace building and the risks that are required to be taken mean that I need to have some understanding that on the other side there will be reciprocity and that there will be deliverability. And so I think that, and I am not in any sense criticizing what Nelson Mandela said. He said, and he was right, you know, it's not just about making peace with your friends, it is about making peace with your enemies. But in Northern Ireland, on this island and within these islands, crucially, it is also about the two communities, the two traditions on this island, making peace with themselves and then making peace with each other. I've often described peace building as a bit like bridge building. You can have a great process just like you can have a bridge, and it looks really good. But unless you have the strong supports on either side of that bridge, the bridge will not stand. And I think, if I may say so, one of the deficits in our peace process today in Northern Ireland is that the strong supports on either side are not as strong as they should and could be. And where we need to invest is in building those supports in that community. And I know that there is Together Building a United Community strategy, and that is important because the peace walls will not come down and the barriers will not be removed to a shared society unless we strengthen the very core of our society, our communities on both sides. And that's why I think at the moment the bridge needs strengthening. And the issues that need to be resolved have got to be addressed. And so I return to the theme. Someone once said, it's an old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. Actually, I think when it comes to peace building, it's the other way around. It is about keeping your friends close. And we see it in many parts of the world. The ability of a leader to deliver peace is inextricably linked with his or her ability to bring their people with them, to communicate, to provide leadership. And I think that's what we need. That's what we need in Northern Ireland. That's what we need in the Middle East. That's what we need in Eastern Europe and in other places where there's conflict today. But the final thing I would want to say is this. Politicians very often are criticized. Leaders are often attacked because they're not moving at the pace that some people would want them to move. And certainly you can't build peace on the basis that you move at the pace of the slowest person in your group. That is what leadership is about. But you cannot get too far ahead of your own people. And therefore, making peace with your enemies is important, but it can only be successful if you make peace with your friends. Thank you.